right, just very happy to have Dr. Erica Brown as our guest speaker. I will be quick to give her as much time as possible. I'll just say she is one of the leading thinkers and writers in our community. And she's wide-ranging. If you appreciate any of the three things, she is the woman. Okay, she's written Svarim on various Sifrei Tanakh. Where's Ethan Figure? Okay, Ethan Figure's been carrying that around all week. Okay.
Trying to impress me?
It worked. Okay. Tanakh, she has written and thought a lot about the teaching profession, and currently does a lot of work about leadership. So even though she's even broader than that, if those three things are interesting to you, go listen to Dr. Brown.
Okay. If not, you can have a longer lunch or whatever it is you're doing. It's really a delight to be here. It's a delight to be here with my friend Rav Blau, and also this my son-in-law's yeshiva. He's a boger of Oraita, so a special place in my heart. And he actually just became a father for the first time last night. Thank you. So if you learn well and you get a good shidduch, you know, if you're a graduate of Oraita, good things happen. I have actually some extra handouts if we need them. So, does anyone need copies? We are it is very text-based, so no. Okay. Thank you. All right, so I currently work as the Vice Provost for Values and Leadership at YU, and I have the great zchut and privilege of running the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks-Herenstein Center at YU. Rabbi Sacks was my teacher. I'm married to a Brit and lived in London in the years when Rabbi Sacks was the principal of Jews College, which is a small Judaic studies institution that's part of University of London. I was very privileged to do a degree under him and have him as my master's thesis advisor, taught in his shul, taught Talmud to his wife, Lady Elaine, and watched the rise of really an incredible Torah giant. I must tell you that I was in a store and I had my handouts just now on the way here. I had to buy something for a yard site, and my handouts were visible. And the woman, the kupa'it, who was ringing up said, Rav Sacks? And she just could not stop talking about how Rabbi Sacks influenced her, brought Nechama to her, gave chizuk to her. And of course, since October 7th, I wonder often what it is he would have told us, because he had that kind of inspiring, angelic way with words and a very prophetic sort of voice to help people get through unprecedented difficulties. What I want to talk about today is a subject that, particularly nearing the end of his life, was very important to him. And that is the plague of loneliness and also the route to happiness. And if you see in your, I wanted you to see a picture of him. The reason I would suggest the reason he's happy is that this was when he won the Templeton Prize, which is Ke'ilu, the Nobel Prize for Religion. One of you should be Zocha one day. And he also, if you notice, he's in a yellow tie. He's in a yellow tie because someone told him that the color yellow makes people happy. And so he decided at that point that he would wear, I don't know if it was exclusively yellow, but if he could make other people happy, just with wearing something, he would do so. And I had the privilege of editing an anthology of about 45 articles on happiness in the thinking of Rabbi Sacks and beyond, with our assistant director, Dr. Shira Weiss, who's an expert in medieval philosophy, and his daughter Gila Tal Ben Shachar, the psychologist, wrote a foreword. He's very entranced by Rabbi Sacks's writing, and Gila, his daughter, also included a foreword. And she said, happiness was very important to my father because it was not easy for him. In other words, this was not something that came naturally to him with his academic disposition, and he had to make conscious and intentional choices to both have happiness and to protect his happiness. In fact, I'm reading a beautiful novel called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Boyer, and he makes an observation there that in our desperate attempt to hold on to our happiness, Our desperate attempt to hold on to happiness robs us of our joy. We're so busy trying to be happy, and we notice when people are unhappy as if it's almost illegal to be unhappy. And I just want to share with you my own many seminary years of learning. I think the year of learning, and certainly 2 years of learning and continued learning, is amazing. It's a growth and transformational year for many of you. It will be if it hasn't been already. And you feel certain changes, but some of them don't come out of joy. Many of them, I'll just speak personally, come out of a degree of intensity and a degree of self-observation and self-consciousness that can be very painful. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but we all know, if we're being honest, that the kind of changes, the kind of self-scrutiny, the sense that I'm not living up to expectations, the sense that I don't really know what it means to be pious, can create a deep, a personal, emotional indent within us that is very hard to eradicate or to heal, and it's hard to have a salve for it. And I say that because towards the end of Rabbi Sacks' life, when he was battling cancer, and actually it started when his father got sick. When his father got sick and passed away, Rabbi Sacks writes that he became much more open about his own depression. And he suffered from depression for 2 years, and he talks about the way in which it impacted him. Now, depression on some level is amazing for writers, right? You're writing from a very deep place, a place of great vulnerability, which helps you resonate with people. But it also means that you're a suffering person. And so I want to turn to the solace that Rabbi Sacks had, at least that he talks about on page 2. And so we'll go to page 2 first. And I will say that Rabbi Sacks in Morality, which was his last published book that came out in 2022, Rabbi Sacks, came out in 2020. I'm trying to think if he was, maybe he was alive for a very small part of it, and now I'm just confused in my head for a second. But when he wrote that, Rabbi Sacks was an amazing reader. In fact, Alan Sacks, his brother, who's a lawyer in Yerushalayim, said at his hesped, my brother read 1 book a day, no pressure. 1 book a day, and Rabbi Sacks actually wrote a book for his brother. His brother Alan approached his older brother Jonathan when he decided to become a lawyer, and he sort of was struggling with the decision to become a lawyer because here his brother was having so much impact in the meaning equation, and now I'm going to go into law. And so Rabbi Sacks, is sort of in typical fashion, instead of texting his brother or calling his brother to give him advice, he wrote him a book. And that book is To Heal a Fractured World, where Rabbi Sacks makes a very poignant case about the fact that we can all impact the world in very deep and profound ways, no matter what we do, if we have the right intention, and we sort of are planful in the way that we work. So Rabbi Sacks on loneliness. Does anyone want to read for me? It's English. No worries. Please, you are? Wait, I'm going to put on my glasses so I can hear you. What did you say? Rui. Okay, beautiful. If you could read for me. In the middle there.
Something similar to be traced in modern times. Rav Kook, when he arrived in Israel, wrote, there is no one, young or old, who I can share my thoughts, or was able to comprehend my viewpoint, and is where he moved. Even more candid was the late Rabbi Joseph Dov Soloveitchik. Near the beginning of his famous essay, The Lonely Man of Faith, he writes stuff. I am lonely. He continues. I am lonely because at times I feel rejected and thrust away by everybody, not excluding my most intimate friends and the workings of Psalms. My father and my mother have forsaken me, ring quite often in my ears, like the plaintive cooing of the turtle. This is extraordinary. At times of loneliness, I found great solace in this passage. They told me I was not alone in feeling lonely. Other people have been here before.
Okay, so thank you, Roy. In your words, what do you think he's saying about the confession of other people's loneliness?
It like brings them together through like shared experience.
Right. Now, I would like to be with you in community, but if I can't be with you, I'm glad to know that your loneliness was a driver for something important. Bless you. Now, I want to say, any of you who are truly going to individuate in this life, meaning you separate from your parents in some way, emotionally, intellectually, religiously, or from what I'll call the religious herd, are going to face loneliness. In fact, it's a great reason never to leave the herd, is you let the herd make decisions for you. You sort of do what everyone else is doing. And the temptation in the Orthodox community is enormous. Because we're mitzvah observant, we're shomer mitzvot, we go to certain institutions. I see it at YU, it's legion. You know, oh, I'm going to room with all the people I went to camp with and all the people I went to yeshiva with, and we're going to be on the same floor. Right? Now, I taught for 5 years at GW. I ran a center there before I came to YU. People go to college so that they can open up their worlds, so that they can make new friends and acquaintances, so that they can discover what they want to do by taking a lot of different courses. They're not really sure what they want to do for a living, and they're not bothered by that. But somehow, in our community, someone is 5 years old, he already knows he wants to be an accountant, so that he can buy the same car that his parents drive. And so I say this because we are not lonely enough sometimes. We're not individuating enough. We're not understanding that sometimes psychologically, in order to honor the great individuality that HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed us with, we actually have to break away and sometimes do things differently than others. That doesn't mean we don't tolerate others, we're not kind to others, we don't live with others, but we also make decisions that aren't the herd's decisions. And we live with that, even if it's somewhat uncomfortable. I could even venture to say that the great gift of monotheism, that Judaism gave the world, is the sense that if there is only one God, if God is unique, and we are supposed to live B'Tselem Elohim, in God's image, then that means that we have to find what is unlike everybody else in ourselves. So Rabbi Sacks took care of his loneliness. He recognized it, he articulated it, and in that articulation, he found company, the company of people like him, Rav Kook and Rav Soloveitchik. A little later you'll read, there are people who find solace in solitude. They're alone without being lonely. But for the most part, life is about relationships. That is why loneliness can be depressing and dangerous. So even though he's matzdik, he justifies his own loneliness and understands it, he also wrote in Morality about the crisis of loneliness. He was very concerned with the breakdown of the family, with the breakdown of marriage, with the descending birth rates all over the world. And he writes a lot about creating covenantal communities of responsibility and care and compassion, where the grammar of chesed is fundamental, is not something that one can take for granted. It begins in the family. So while he is explaining the gifts of loneliness, he was also very concerned about the problem of loneliness. And I want to actually talk a little bit about the way that he pursued happiness through what many people misunderstand as the most depressing book in Tanakh, the book of Kohelet. I do want to say something before I continue. I actually had a privilege this summer. Rabbi Sacks' archives are being collected currently in the Sifriyat Leumit. How many of you have been to the National Library here in Jerusalem? Not enough. This sign is doing better. Just saying. But this is a gift to the Jewish people. It's really a remarkable place. Watching how they created their collections and the variety of people who study there. I was just there this week and often do work there. Anyway, I got to see the archives. Because of my work, I went with a special archivist who will be working on these when they become public in 5 years. And I got to see the letter that Rabbi Sacks wrote to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was a very important role model and influence for him. And when you understand more about the Rebbe, and I invite you to read Rabbi Joseph Telushkin's book on the Rebbe. It's a big book. It's an extremely inspiring book. And you get a sense of what it means to really be a Jewish visionary. Anyway, he wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's a typed letter, and he asked him, should I become the chief rabbi of the United Synagogue, the British Commonwealth? So that was, it was like a page-and-a-half letter. He writes the letter, and the Rebbe, if you know anything about the Rebbe often responded to letters, but didn't write anything. He didn't write a letter back to you, that you could then go and sell on eBay and probably retire. But what he did is he made notations in the margins. On this particular letter, there was only one thing that appeared, and it was, the shape of a smile with 2 arrows on either side to switch the words should and I to I should. And he sent it back. Amazing, right? So we're going to talk about 2 letters of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And that was all he really needed to say, which is pretty amazing. And Rabbi Sacks served in that capacity for 22 years. And when he finished serving in that capacity, he really began his study of leadership. I'm right now preparing an article for a volume on Rabbi Sacks, for a tradition about Rabbi Sacks and leadership. And he wasn't studying it really as an intellectual discipline as much as thinking, how do you get through the years of how do you build something and change something and not only put out fires? So things that, as an academic, someone with an academic disposition of philosopher, it's not easy to run institutions. And he really taught himself how to do that. So we're going to look at Kohelet, but I want you to do a little bit of learning first. There are 7 clusters of psukim about happiness. I only gave you 6, but you're welcome to look at the 7th. And it's a repeated theme throughout Kohelet. So I'm going to make an assumption, having written on Kohelet, that Kohelet very often repeats certain themes. What are themes in Kohelet that you come across? Emptiness, nihilism. In fact, Hevel has been translated by some modern Bible commentators as absurdity, right? The King James translation is vanity, is futility. We're going to use a particular translation, which is breath. Robert Alter's translation that Rabbi Sacks also used, that in some way it's a fleeting breath. Life is a fleeting breath. Now, that's not saying that you live in existential crisis because of the fleeting breath. What I believe it's actually saying is, in my search, Kohelet says, in my search for eternity, for things of lasting value, I actually keep encountering things of temporal value. Now, temporal value is in itself extremely important. And I want to share with you a conversation. You can get this as a free download. It's an essay, short essay, also great, free and short, great. Great combo. Rabbi Sigmund Freud, going out of the rabbi mode. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was walking with the poet, the young poet at the time, Maria Rilke. And Rilke and Freud are walking in Vienna. It's beautiful. I believe it was a spring day. And Rilke looked despondent. And he was upset. And the reason he was upset is that he said, everything here is beautiful and everything's going to die. In other words, he could not make peace with the temporality of existence. And Freud actually chastised him and thought of him as a younger, perhaps unwise poet in certain ways, because he couldn't appreciate that true beauty comes from transience. It comes from the fact that things don't last. And therefore, we assume greater beauty or we appreciate the beauty while we have it. So for Kohelet, temporality is in itself not a bad thing. He will talk about different variations of temporality that make him upset about certain things. But we're going to actually look at the psukim, these cluster psukim on happiness, and then think a little bit about what Kohelet is about, and then we'll read something that Rabbi Sacks wrote about it. So you have on the bottom of page 2 these psukim. They go to page 4. I want you to look at 4 with me for a second, because I'm going to give you 10 minutes of chavruta time. You can organize yourselves as you wish. But what I'd like you to look at is what similarities are you noticing in these psukim, and what differences or contradictions appear in them. Okay, so just a framing for don't just read them. Everyone can read. It's reading and analyzing them. They seem to be saying different things, and we want to get the subtleties. So I'm going to put 10 minutes on my phone and enjoy. Read away. All right, we're about to be. Just finish your sentence. Just finish your sentence. I have all of 10 seconds left on my clock. How'd it go? Go Cabruso? If not, don't tell me. Okay, so what I want to do now is there you go. I want to hear some of your observations about these psukim. I intentionally put, of course, they're the prakim and the pasuk numbers so that you could see, the progression, perhaps, if you want to call it that throughout the book. Observations. You are?
Me?
Yeah.
Zeb, okay.
Hi, Zeb.
In each of them except for one, every time he's talking about the happiness, he's saying the man who's eating and drinking, and each one, it's like he's referring to that as like living in that moment, and like when you're eating and drinking that moment, that's making that happen.
Okay, so again, temporality, eating and drinking, the act of eating and drinking, and he's going to valorize the act of eating and drinking, which is a little surprising, particularly in certain contexts when he praises it. But eating and drinking seem to be some kind of solution. So this is, I think this is a shir before lunch. Is that right? Okay, so good. We're getting ready for a Kohelet moment, a temporal Kohelet moment. You are?
Raymond.
Hi, Raymond.
So Kohelet centers on the fact that life is hard and there are injustices and it's hard to find meaning in that. And his response in his Pesukim are in fleeting moments of life, in small moments of life, you could find that meaning, you could find that joy, rather than like having to, have the answers to all the injustices and the hard things that are going on in the world.
Beautiful. So do we have an expectation that happiness is our due and our right, and that large swaths of life are going to bring us this joy? Or do we say they're small moments, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of these smaller moments and how that kind of expectation may be more realistic and more fair? Raymond, are you Syrian?
Yeah.
I don't know any Raymonds who are not Syrian. I grew up in Deal. Nice to meet you. All right, who else? Yes, you are?
I'm Micha.
Okay, hi, Micha.
We were talking about just in the first class the contrast between the language of Mahalal and how it is sort of a play on words. You could read it as Mahulal, of praise, and Maza Isa, which sounds like a rhetorical question but could be read as actually impressive.
An actual question.
So there's the opposite is contained within the actual text.
Okay, so let's go to where Micha took us to, which is page 2, on the bottom of page 2. Marti ani belibi lafana enescha. Now enescha b'simcha is from nisuk. Nisuk means what? Nisuk hamayim, nisuk hayayin, right? The pouring, in other words, the sort of libation, right? So the idea of almost being saturated with simcha. Ure'ei betuv v'hinei gam hu havel. And he says, I really wanted to, to deepen my experience of temporal happiness, and it didn't work. Ma ze osa, right? Ma ze osa. What actually is accomplished by this? So I want to think a little bit with you about Parak 2, Parak Bet. I'm not sure, I'm not testing on anyone on their Kohelet knowledge, but he undergoes a thought experiment in chapter 2. Anyone know what that experiment is? What? He's trying out different things. It's the Epicurean delight, right? He says to himself, you know what? I'm going to build batim. I'm going to build I'm going to have farmlands. I'm going to have orchards. I'm going to have many female and male singers and servants. I'm just going deep in the materialism, and let's see if that produces happiness. What do you think he's going to say?
Nope.
Yeah.
He says that it gave him temporary happiness, but then he looks out on everything that he had learned and accomplished and tried, and he realizes that all of it is stupid.
Okay. So what's your name?
Moshe.
Moshe, you Canadian?
My dad is.
Yeah, you got the roots out. I'm trying to put it all together. Okay. So Moshe says that actually he does get something out of it. And he says, I enjoyed my wealth, but that's all I got out of it. The forum on materialism, I've written about it. There's a tradition forum. You can get that also as a free download. A lot of different articles about materialism and its impact on the Orthodox community. So he says, I tried this experiment, wasn't so successful. And it wasn't successful in terms, for the reason that I wanted it to be successful, is purpose to be found here. What else are you noticing? You are?
I'm Gavi.
Hi, Gavi. I have a Gavi.
It kind of seems like there's this progression where he goes from unsure to then more experiential to more of a realization, and then seems like he's getting more confident with understanding, and eventually goes to praise it and then commands other people to do it.
Okay, so interesting. Is there an evolution that's present here where he starts refining his notions of happiness and then really sort of understands that there's something positive that he can promote in his particular understanding? And I wonder if some of you saw or caught the fact that he uses the expression twice here, matat Elohim hi. It is a gift from God. In other words, eating and drinking at a table is a gift from God. This year in particular, I think you're experiencing yeshiva at a time where we're seeing sort of beautiful ksharim among very fragmented segments of Israeli society in terms of the belief in the land of Israel, the people of Israel, and fighting the good fight. Not so easy in the United States or around the world to make that claim. And at the same time, this sense that I've been answering questions from students. How could God do this? How could Hashem do this to Israel? How come this is prolonged for such a long time? Where is God? And students of all ages, I teach adults as well, and it's interesting. It's very rare to hear someone say, where is God? I had the best day. Something beautiful happened. This amazing nisim v'niflaot in my life, and I'm asking, do I see God in this? I see God in this, and that sort of observation is coming out a little bit less these days. The idea that matat Elohim is temporal happiness. He sees there's some evolution. Temporal happiness is actually valid happiness. And don't try to diminish it or trivialize it simply because it is not as expansive as you expected. Set different kinds of expectations, which I think Raymond was talking about a little bit himself. I want to look at one pasuk with you because I want to also honor our time together, and that is in the bottom of 3. Perek Chet, I think, is for me the most confounding of the psukim about simcha. He says, "Yesh hevel asher nasa la'aretz asher yesh tzadikim asher magia aleim k'masei rishayim v'yesh rishayim shmagia aleim k'masei tzadikim amarti shegam zeh havel." He's looking at his life, and he says, "I've made an observation." And what does he observe? That good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. What do we call this in philosophy? Theodicy. Well done. Now this side of the room is winning. Theodicy, the notion that good things happen, that bad things happen to good people, is a struggle against injustice. It's a struggle that I hope you will fight against with the powers of your being. And he's not saying it in the way that Yirmiyahu says it or the way that Eov says it. What's different about Kohelet's observations?
Was it pointless?
What?
He calls it pointless.
He calls it pointless as opposed to?
Questioning.
Okay, as opposed to question. What's your name?
Mayor.
Okay, Mayor. So he's not actually making a lot of judgments about this. He's not railing against God. He's saying, I just want to share something that I see in the world that makes the world feel like it's a place of meaninglessness, right? There's the nihilism right there. And then he just changes. It's like emotional whiplash. V'shibachti ani et hasimcha, asher ein tov la'adam tachat hashemesh. Ki im le'achol v'lishtok v'lismach. Right? There's nothing more that we could ask for in life than to eat and drink. And that is your solution to the problem of theodicy? Did anyone experience that emotional whiplash when you were reading it? You did. Good. You say to yourself, how is this a solution? So I want to propose something, just something for you to think about, especially in an intense year such as this. Kohelet, I believe, is positing what I call a theology of distraction. In life, according to John Gottman, who does a lot of work in relationships, he says in relationships, there are fixable problems and perpetual problems. There are things that you can take care of, that you can resolve over time or through conversation and communication. He said, but there are problems in every relationship, and with ourselves too, that are perpetual. We seem to keep going back to the same things. I always joke that on every anniversary, you could send an anniversary card for how long you're going to have an argument about the same topic, right? It's just going to come up again and again. You might experience this with siblings, with parents. There's certain themes we have in relationships that repeat themselves. And one of the things that Gottman says is when you're facing a perpetual problem, don't make the mistake of trying to solve it because you're not going to solve it, right? It's not fixable. That's why it's perpetual. He said instead, try to distract yourselves. So you're having an argument with a friend, and it's getting heavy, and it's uncomfortable, or it's your roommate. But you realize that there are a lot of things that you care about this person, and this is getting in the way of your relationship. So then you decide, instead of arguing about this or being uncomfortable about this, let's go bowling. Why? because you're not good at bowling, and therefore you will laugh at yourselves, and like you'll restore other things that you know are in that relationship. And this is very, very important guidance in marriage and in romantic relationships, is to say, when you get to that perpetual problem, why is it a perpetual problem? Because what does Jean-Paul Sartre say? Hell is other people. Hell is other people. That's his observation. So when you think to yourself, hell is other people, because people are hard to manage, people are unlike us, they have different proclivities, they have different sensitivities, and we don't need to be as defamatory as he is. What we can say is, I actually am wise enough to recognize perpetual problems, to observe them, and then say, let's do something else so that we restore the relationship that we know we have. Which, by the way, is true in your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? There are perpetual problems. There are things that are going to come up again and again, and then you say to yourself, how do I want to see God? What kind of relationship do I want to have with God? How do I turn in some way? And there's authenticity. It's not a fake thing. It's not inauthentic to turn and say, this is where God and I, maybe I'm struggling, but where in what capacity and what activities do I find God? And Kohelet finds God in eating and drinking. It was being with other people. Being with other people. Turning the happiness outwards. And you might say this feels naive or simplistic, but I actually don't think that's the case at all. I think in many ways the theology of distraction is one of the deepest ways that we can live a life of wisdom. And I want to turn to the last page to see Rabbi Sacks has a beautiful video about Kohelet. It's an hour long. So for those of you who can find it online, but I just wanted to take one clip. Poor Kohelet, we're on page 4. Poor Kohelet, he was the man who wrote Ecclesiastes. Tradition has long identified him with King Solomon. He was, we recall, the man who had it all and discovered it was not enough. Palaces, gardens, wives, wealth, all promised happiness, none delivered. The more wealth, the more worry, the more knowledge, the more weariness of the spirit. In the end, all he could say was meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. We recognize Kohelet. He's the billionaire with the private jet, the apartment on Fifth Avenue, the holiday home in Cape Ferrat, the Armani suit, the expensive wife, who discovers that it all adds up to less than the sum of its parts. The route to happiness turns out to be harder than taking the waiting out of wanting. Kohelet forgot something that I discovered by chance. I told you we're going to do another letter of the Rebbe. Many years ago, I went to visit one of the great religious leaders of the 20th century, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. As I sat waiting to see him, I began talking to some of his followers. Among other things, they told me this story. Someone had written to the Rebbe in a state of deep depression. The letter went something like this: I would like the Rebbe's help. I wake up each day sad and apprehensive. I can't concentrate. I find it hard to pray. I keep the commandments, but I find no spiritual satisfaction. I go to synagogue, but I feel alone. I begin to wonder what life is about. I need help. The Rebbe wrote a brilliant reply that did not use a single word. All he did was this. He circled the first word of every sentence and sent the letter back. The disciple understood. The Rebbe had answered his question and set him on the path to recovery. The ringed word was I. Very powerful, very simple. Basically saying, if you want deliverance from the state of depression, you have to do that in the company of others. In fact, Rabbi Sacks, in an interview, and then he wrote about it, but not probably somewhere that you would come across. Rabbi Sacks, when he was on his honeymoon, he was swimming in the sea in Italy, and far from his wife, who was on the shore, Lady Elaine, and he began to drown. He went down multiple times, and someone saw his hands and picked out his hand, and from that point onward, it drew him out of the water through his hand and saved his life. And imagine, what a way to ruin a honeymoon. And he didn't speak about this, I think, if I'm not mistaken, for several decades of his life. But again, while he was combating his own vulnerability as a cancer sufferer, he began to open up. And he said, just as the principle we have from Gemara Brachot, a prisoner cannot free himself from prison. You can't always do this alone. The key to happiness is to make your table a place where you bring in friends and strangers, where you serve food and drink, where you just say, I'm not going to solve all the problems of the world. But what I can create is a very deep and meaningful state of temporality where I can see God and I can see the other and I get out of myself. And that's maybe something to think about as we balance and manage states of loneliness and states of community, and find ways to consciously, in a disciplined fashion, tell ourselves, I'm not gonna get here alone. I'm not gonna get here if I can't make myself a little bit vulnerable about what I'm experiencing. And I can't get here when I hit my head continuously against perpetual problems. Instead of saying, they're fixable problems, and when it comes to perpetual problems, perhaps I will discipline myself to find a meaningful distraction. Thank you very much for learning with me. And honoring Rabbi Sacks with me. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Is that okay? And then if any of you are honor students at YU or anyone, you're welcome to talk to me about the Leadership Scholarship Program or any of our programs. If anyone wants to talk about Yeshiva University, I'm really, really so happy to do so. Mayor.
Yeah, I'm just curious because seemingly the text excerpts that we read from Rabbi Sacks seem to be in very sharp contrast to what Kohelet's talking about. Kohelet's writing about the pleasures to be found in everyday passings, and seemingly Rabbi Sacks is very, maybe not critical of these, but was much more focused on like the more eudaimonic view of happiness that's more encompassing of life.
Yeah, I love your use of eudaimonic. Awesome. Thank you. Let's talk. I think that, and I was just talking to Quincy over here. I think that as Rabbi Sacks aged, he left the world of, I would say, the darker world of philosophy in certain ways. And I say that because I studied philosophy, Quincy studied philosophy as an undergraduate, and I think because he chose a field ultimately which was not academic, he began to actually realize what his congregants needed, what his community needed. And what they needed lifting. In fact, he wrote a book of essays, they're short, for his mother. His mother says, Jonathan, you never write about anything happy, right? In other words, you could sit and be a philosopher and have angst and like, I'm an existentialist, I look in the mirror, no one understands me. And I think for him, he felt like, that is one way to have a path, but I think in his writings, he wanted to do the opposite. He really wanted to lift people. I think if you had an opportunity to sit and talk to him, that wasn't his natural disposition, or his, as I said before, Gila said he had to work hard on this, and I think he worked hard at it in his writings to sort of. I don't know that he would disagree with what we just said. It's my teaching with his teaching. And maybe I should just say that it's my teaching, the distraction, theology of distraction. I think he probably reads it at least at this level a little bit more simplistically. But in his video, it's a great share. So if you have an opportunity to listen to it, I think he only has one video of Kohelet, and you'll find it, and you can always email me. Okay. Yes. You are? I am.
There's two points. Number one, some of what Mayor Ross was saying is, do you think that he's basically defaulting to a phenomenology because he can't find essential meaning, or is he simply saying that we should go with that rather than essential meaning? Because that seems to be more what Sacks is going for. He's saying there is this great meaning, but because it's so much more difficult to find, we should just focus on these small phenomenological experiences.
Right.
But
so
which is we don't have the big answer, but we have these small.
Right. So I actually think that this is a book of repeated questions. So I did the research for the book during COVID. And then I took my job at YU when the book was halfway done, and I was like, oh my gosh, how am I going to finish this? So I sort of canceled. I was sort of near, and then I was nearing the end, and then I was supposed to go to Israel, and I spent 2 weeks, 5 a.m. to 10 at night. I was like, I gotta finish this. And what I noticed, and I just gave you happiness, but let's say things like amilut, work. He really questioned work, and he kept going back to it, but the questions got more sophisticated, and I think that's true in life. When you're younger, you might ask philosophical questions, and you might ask variations of them, like the Tzaddik Baralo, across the course of your life. But the questions themselves, Cynthia Ozick, the novelist and essayist, says, if you can ask a really sharp question, you get closer to the answer. And I think what you're seeing here is him asking, these are questions about temporality, but he asks a lot of questions about wealth and about the purpose of work. And of course, the idea, the closure of mitzvot, like saying, bless you, again, there are things that you can take comfort in. I don't think he's saying don't ask the questions or just take my answers. I think actually this book is canonized because it is the most realistic book of what it means to be human. And this is the human condition. We're going to ask questions. We're going to be disturbed by everyday issues of purpose. We'll find an answer. Perhaps some of his answers will be adequate, but you have to find your own answers, right? So I think he's basically saying become a questioning person, but don't forget the foundational aspects of temporal happiness and also mitzvah performance and belief in God. Any other? I don't know if that's an adequate answer. Yes.
Just wondering, the point is that we have to share our experience with other people, but then he brings the example of drinking and eating. The can be just as easily said like learning Torah or something that's also spiritual.
Right.
Or you do with other people.
So there's a lot of spiritual behaviors that we engage in that do not make an appearance here. So I'll give you a great example. Talks a lot about money. There's no mention of tzedakah in the whole book, right? And there's not what we would call traditional Talmud Torah. I mean, this is really so long before Bnei Yeshiva are, as we know, Torah learning. I think we sometimes read something with yeshivish eyes before there's a yeshiva. So I think what he was doing here is collecting citations and questioning the validity of them. So he was sort of saying, here's common wisdoms, I'm going to add my wisdom to it, but a lot of times people don't realize this because they're not quotations around this, but a lot of modern scholars have pointed out, sometimes he's actually taking a quotation and saying, is this true? Like a stitch in time saves 9. And then you go, oh, is that true? Well, what does that actually mean? So I think that's what he's doing here. And there are traditional religious values we have today which make no appearance in the book. But it's interesting how many times God appears in the book, right? Esther, you'd say, oh, God must not appear. God is all over the book. And that's not true for a text like Esther. Yeah, I want to, I think you said 12:54, right? That's it. Okay, so if anyone wants to, I'll be here for a few more minutes, but I want you to have lunch because it's happy, right? So have an afternoon of simcha.